Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Removing Roadblocks to Getting Published. Our speaker today is my good friend, Patricia Raybon. She's an award-winning author and journalist who writes about faith, grace, and race, seeking to inspire healing and connection in Christ. Her many acclaimed books include My First White Friend, which won a Christopher Award, I Told the Mountain to Move, which was a Book of the Year finalist in Christianity Today magazine's contest, a one-year devotional on Bible virtues called God's Great Blessings, Bound for Glory. And she's written a tribute to African-American spirituals, co-authored with calligrapher Timothy Botts called, and then in another book called Undivided, a Muslim daughter, her Christian mother, their path to peace. That was co-authored with her daughter, Allain Raybon. So Patricia has spoken at many of the conferences that I've done, Frederick Buechner conferences, Writing for Your Life, Publishing in Color. She's just a phenomenal person, and I'm so glad to have her here because she has got such great wisdom that she can share with us. And so don't forget to join her at her website too, patriciaraybon.com. So with all of that, welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Brian. It's so good to see you this morning.
Same here.
Brian, if you would like to do this, jump in at any time. And actually, anybody who's watching can do that too. Think of it as a conversation because we don't talk enough. You know, writers, we're solo agents. And so it's always great to spend time with one another and talk. And so for today, I thought, let me just put some flags on this conversation for the listeners and also in my mind. And I thought I'm going to pull together 5 tips on things I wish I knew when I started as a journalist and as I started as an author. Because I have to confess my age right now, Brian, but I was thinking this morning, I've been doing this work for almost 50 years. And when I graduated from journalism school, my first job at 21 was for the United Methodist Publishing House in Park Ridge, Illinois. And then I went on to newspaper journalism for about 15 years, and then went up to the University of Colorado and taught journalism for about 15 years. And people are probably adding up the numbers. And I've been writing full time almost 12 years. And so in thinking about our talk today, I thought, wow, if I knew when I started out what I know now, what a different journey it would have been. So that's what I wanted to share today, just 5 things that would have made a huge difference, starting with a point I shared with you yesterday. Number 1 is to keep your day job. And I didn't understand that at first for some important reasons. The first one has to do with aspiring writers and aspiring authors who have this vision and this passion, have a message. God has poured something into them and they want to share it. But they haven't done any writing. It's not impossible to learn how to write a book. But if you haven't written an article or an essay or even a letter to an editor and gotten something published, it makes it so much harder. And so while I had been trained myself as a journalist, I regret that I didn't spend at least a year or 2 going to conferences like yours, Brian, and learning about the craft of writing and the rhythm of the writing life, and learning about the ins and outs of book publishing and book marketing. That kind of journey and an understanding about it makes all the difference. And so what happened is that I was teaching, when my first book was published, I was teaching at the University of Colorado on the tenure track. And you've probably heard this phrase, publish or perish. And I, as a tenure track professor seeking tenure, I had to get published. I had already been published in, I wrote essays and was able, I've talked to you about this, Brian, was able to get published in some national venues, which was great. And so agents started to come forth and said, can I, if you write a book, I'd like to publish you. But at the time, I suddenly had a book. I'll share it with you, my first book, My First White Friend. And it got published and it got quite a lot of attention. I didn't have a clue what I was doing as an author. And my publisher was able to get me on some great interviews on places like the Today Show and the Oprah Winfrey Show. Remember when Oprah Winfrey had her program. And I was, first of all, clueless about what I was doing in terms of talking about my book. I didn't know how to talk about it. But the most important thing, and the thing I wanted to emphasize this morning, is that soon after that, I didn't recognize that the job that I had as a university professor was my platform. And later on, this was before, Brian, before anybody really talked about having a platform, because this predated the internet, really. And all I wanted to do was to be a full-time author. I didn't understand that the position I had was the platform I needed to sell my book.
Well, I think there are so many people, that come to our conferences and such that are in the same kind of position as you're describing. And it's not even just the publishing industry. I've found in other industries that I've been in, the people inside the industry assume that the whole rest of the world understands how it works.
Right.
And people who have not been in the industry have no clue as to how it works. And
exactly.
Publishing is no different. And, I think, not to try to sell our conferences or anything, but, there's no question that being able to immerse yourself with a group of authors and a group of people from the publishing industry is just way, 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 way more than you can Google, and find out about it. It's just having those conversations, meeting those people, understanding what matters is just so important.
Plus the networking of it. But the thing that I hear, Brian, I hear people who say at those conferences who say, I'm a pastor, but I really want to be an author, or I'm a nurse, or I'm a counselor, but all I've ever wanted to do is write a book. And what I'm trying to say in this first point about keep your day job is, if you're a pastor, keep being a pastor. If you're a nurse, keep being a nurse. Thrive in that vineyard, and then when you finish your book and get it published, then you have a platform from which to share it with the world. And I'm thinking about one of my favorite authors, Brian. Her name is Dr. Sandra Dalton. And she's a physician, an MD, an African-American. I don't know if you know Dr. Sandra.
I don't. I know the name, but I've never talked with her.
So she writes about what she calls sacred rest. And I think that's the title of her latest book. But she does that from her platform as a physician. She works at a hospital somewhere in one of the cities down south. And so it gives her a place to, from which to talk about her topic, but also a place where people can find her and they can identify with her life as a physician in the context of her topic. And so I see her all the, she's on TV, she's doing speaking in women's magazines. And so I've observed that people who understand that advantage will not leave their day job. They'll stay there and thrive. And then from there, launch their books. From there, launch their writing life. And so in my case, Brian, I was a journalism professor at the time when this book came out. I keep showing the cover because that's what we do, right? And so I was a journalism professor writing about faith. Now that's a great platform. I left it thinking, wrongly thinking, oh, I'll be an author full time. Well, that was not a platform. And, my bio would say award-winning author. And this book did happen to win a lot of awards. And I had been blessed to win a lot of writing awards as a journalist. But that's not a platform. A platform is the vineyard where you're working, whatever your ministry happens to be. I'm thinking about Latasha Morrison. She started a ministry called Be the Bridge, excuse me, on racial, I think it's her message says equipping God's people to do the hard work of racial reconciliation. Well, she built that ministry. Then she wrote a book. And so that insight about staying where the Lord has placed you, whatever that vineyard happens to be, and use it as your platform, it's very powerful. It speaks to me, sharing that speaks to me deeply because I spent a lot of years struggling after I left the university, struggling on my own, trying to be my own platform. And it has been a lot of hard work.
I think there are so many, authors that get into it without understanding what you're describing. They don't understand the value of the platform, the necessity of a platform, in whatever shape that takes. As you said, it can take many different shapes. But there's some people who had built a podcast platform and a very large following with that, and then got a book deal.
Yes.
Or, like you said, had a journalism platform or some other kind of platform and then got a book deal. Trying to do the other way around is very difficult.
Very difficult. So that ties into the second point that I had, and that was to take it to God. We are spiritual writers. That's your audience. And I'm amazed at how often we try to do this work in our own strength instead of seeing first what God is calling us to do. I mean, there are all those scriptures that say, that he knows the plans. We know all of that. But one time I talked with a pastor who was working on a campus pastor with a desire to write a book. And so we were talking, and so I said the things that people of faith say, which was, I asked him, what do you say to God? What do you ask God when you pray? And then he said, I don't pray. That prayer is just not something that I've really developed. And so I talked to him about basically that's crazy. But I hear that from people who, like me, get busy in the hustle, trying to get in the book marketing life and do all the work that's required, instead of first spending that priceless time in God's Word and yielding to the Holy Spirit. We're supposed to be Spirit-led people, and if we are, then we allow the Lord to do the heavy lifting. That's what I'm saying. And so I was thinking, I'm going to show another book jacket, Brian. I hope that's okay.
That's perfectly fine.
But here's my best-selling book of the books that I've written. It's my devotional, and that I did for Tyndale House. And it's interesting to me that the book that required me to spend the most time in the Word, I mean, this book it's a daily devotional. You're talking about 300 plus. That's a lot of devotionals to write. And it took me a good year and more to do all of them. Meaning I spent a ton of time in the Word, a ton of time thinking and praying over what the Lord is saying to us. That time yielded for me as an author my best-selling book. And so for people who are, my husband asked me today, what are you going to say about, he said, I know you're going to talk about marketing, but what are you going to say about God? And I said, that's point number 2. Take it to him and see what God is doing and how he wants to use you as an author.
Well, I think one of the really great examples of that was, what happened last year when I first came up with this crazy idea to do publishing in color.
Yeah.
And, you were one of the first people I spoke with. And, you said, let's pray about it. And, see if it ends up making sense, see if it ends up happening. And, so we had you praying for this. We had other people, that I had similarly spoken with about, when it was just a rough idea. And, look what happened. It's happened. So, I so appreciate, your support, your prayer support, for the different things like that we've tried to do. And it goes both ways. We've been praying for you and, your family and everything else too.
Well, it is exciting, and we're the people who, as spiritual writers, who have been called to do this extraordinary work, which is to help people of faith connect with God. I always say my mission is to inspire people to love God and each other, and so here we have this amazing opportunity to use words to draw people into that journey. And even in 2019, when people say, well, I don't believe, I'm spiritual, but I don't believe, I haven't met anybody who doesn't want to think about God and think about what that means. And we can do a much better job doing that if we spend time with him. And so, that's on this list. I couldn't have made it after I left the University of Colorado and was climbing up the rough side of the mountain, trying to figure out what I was doing as an author and as a woman and as a woman of color and as a wife and a parent and all those different things without first every day taking it to God. And so just a reminder, that's time that, it's, was it Augustine? No, Martin Luther said, I have so many things to do every day that first I have to spend 3 hours in prayer. Do you remember that quote?
Wow, 3 hours.
Yes. And then the idea was after the 3 hours, when he got up off his knees, most of the stuff he had to do, the Lord had already taken care of. So that's number 2. And then the third thing is find yourself. And that takes work. I'm thinking about, but some people are more in tune to it. And I'm thinking, Brian, about a young woman, I don't know her, but she apparently went to one of your publishing and color conferences. I think her name is Tasha. And she has an interest. She was, I believe she was a pageant. She did the pageant queen.
Oh yes. Oh gosh. She Saint Al. Blah, blah, blah. She has 4 names. Two hyphenated first name and hyphenated last name, and Tara Saint Elliott, Saint
Okay.
something like that. Sorry, I can't remember exactly.
Well, I mentioned her because I know she's interested in fashion and faith. And so it doesn't sound like a ministry. But I learned recently that that young woman recently got a 3-book deal with Baker Publishing. And I watched a video where she's talking about it. But when I watched her, I thought, you know, I really love this. She started a website, I believe it's called Adorned in Armor. And she has a podcast called Dressed for Battle. I mean, it's a great little, it's a great distinctive niche. My point being for number 3, find yourself. This is somebody who said, this is who I am. I'm just going to be that. I'm going to own that and do ministry from that place. Back in the day, remember, Brian, in advertising, they used to call it positioning. And so it's about finding where in the landscape of marketing and book writing, and what is my position? Where has the Lord placed me? Who am I, and where has he placed me? And it can be challenging. People will say, you know, I'm just me. I don't have anything special. Everybody has some special identity that if they'll go back to number 2 and spend time with the Lord, he will show you, show us as writers who exactly we are and how he wants to use us.
So a couple things. The woman that you're referring to, I've got her name now. It's Tara Lynn Saint Allain.
Okay,
and
that's a great author name, by the way.
and her website is Adorned in Armor too. And you're right. She got a 3-book deal coming directly out of the Publishing in Color conference last year. So she is a wonderful case study. And
yes.
But the same things that you're talking about in terms of finding your niche is the same strategy that I pitch for new authors. Is that, you know, in today's world, so much of the game is rising above the noise.
Right. Michael Hyatt, you know, has said that for a long time. But it helped, you know, readers want to read. People want information, but they want us as authors to help them understand who exactly we are and what exactly we provide. And I'm writing now for several ministries. One is Our Daily Bread. I'm really excited about that. And Dayspring, you know, the Christian card company, Christian card division of Hallmark, Dayspring has a women's blog called Encourage, and it's spelled with an I. And so I was invited to be one of their contributors, but I needed like a 40-word label for who I am. And so, Brian, I was looking at what a lot of the other contributors were saying. And one woman said something like, so-and-so is glad her past is not her present. And she explores that in her writing from a farm in wherever, where she lives with, you know, her husband, 5 busy kids, a stubborn dog, and 3 chickens. You know, it's just, and so I looked at that and I kept seeing that over and over, these really crisp little short explanations for who the author or the writer is. And so I sat down a few weeks ago, not recently, and I wrote, Patricia Raybon grew up in a time of hate, but rejoices that she found God's love in a time of need. And I've been using that ever since. It's on my website. That's the first thing on my About page. You know, I grew up during the Jim Crow era and struggled, and race matters still matter, and I write about race. And so I said, I'm going to own that label. The second sentence says, you know, I'm an award-winning author and journalist who writes about faith, race, and grace. And that really sums it up. And so when I say that and own it, then when publishers are looking for somebody to write about that, they can find me. And I'm working on a project now that reflects that. I get a ton of freelance writing that speaks to that identity.
I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a very good, you know, positioning statement or summary statement for you.
And everybody needs one. And it's so clarifying because recently I got an offer to speak at a conference on faith and work. And I looked at that and I thought, you know, I could twist that so I could fit that if I, you know, and it was here in Denver, so I didn't have to travel. But anyway, I wrote her back and said, first of all, I'm not traveling much this year to speak, but also that's not my wheelhouse. And so it helps to know on that number 3, find yourself. It's so clarifying for your work and your life as a writer. It doesn't mean that God doesn't stretch you and send you somewhere else. But for this moment right now, you know, for such a time as this, it's helpful to know who I am and, you know, what I'm doing and what I'm talking about. So that's number 3. Were you going to say something else about that?
No, go right ahead.
Okay. I was going to share another book jacket to further illustrate that. This is a book I did with my daughter, Allain, called Undivided. A Muslim daughter, her Christian mother, their path to peace. And when I think about writing voices, one of them is a mom, for me, is a mom voice. And I've written a lot of mom pieces. When USA Today had their Sunday magazine called USA Weekend, do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely.
I did a ton of essays for USA Weekend in my mom voice. And so part of finding yourself is also knowing your writing voices. I am a wife, and I've done a few wife voice pieces. I'm a mom. I've done a lot of mom pieces in books and in essays. I'm a woman of faith. Here's my book on prayer called I Told the Mountain to Move. And I am a woman of color, a person of color. So here's my racial forgiveness book in that voice. And then I showed you my devotional, A Person of Faith. And so in writing conferences, Brian, I invite people while we're sitting there to write down, make a list of who you are. And I have done this even with children. My sister-in-law was a principal for many years in New Jersey, in Piscataway, New Jersey, not far from you.
That is not far from me.
And one time we were just visiting, and she said, since you're here, would you go to school one day and talk to help our language arts teachers talk to the children about writing. And so these are third and fourth graders, Brian. And so I said, make a list of who you are. Right away, the children were saying, oh, I'm a gamer. Or one little girl, she said, I'm a fashionista. And everybody said, oh, she is a fashionista. And so I mean, even the children they knew their identities as 8 and 9-year-olds. And they could affirm one another when they said, one guy said, I'm the nerd, I'm the class nerd. And everybody said, yes. And so we as authors, as adult people, we are, the Lord invites us to sit down. Jesus said to his disciples, who do men say that I am? It's the same question. And when we do that as authors, we know what our writing voices are. Some people, Brian, try to write in one voice when in fact they have many different distinctive identities that can expand their writing repertoire. And I've been blessed to do that as a freelance writer. I was just recently invited to write for a magazine, write a piece, Lifeway, Lifeway, the Lifeway book people, they have some magazines. And I was invited to write for their magazine called Home Life. And so right away I had to go to my homemaking place. And I wrote a piece for them that's supposed to come out this spring called, it was for a spring issue. And so I wrote a piece called Spring Cleaning with God. And, and so it's a think piece where I kind of unpack that idea, what in this whole decluttering season that we're in. But I used it with, from a faith lens. So, and probably said something about, I might have said something about being a person of color in there too, but there are a lot of things I'm not, so that keeps me from trying to, like I'm not a pastor, I'm not a seminarian, I'm not a theologian by training, and so I don't try to walk around in those shoes as an author and as a writer, and I think it saves me a lot of frustration. And so I shared that idea with everybody. Spend some time on answering that question, who am I, distinctly? And it turns out the answers turn out to be great marketing information for us.
And I think great tools for people to focus, as you've basically said, over the last few minutes. Focus is incredibly important. It allows you to prioritize, who you are not, what you do, what you don't do,
yes,
what you say yes to, what you say no to. I mean, prioritization and focus are incredibly important. And as you said, kind of knowing who you are and who your identity is and being clear about that and consistent about that, very, very important. But I think the next point that you have on your list has to do with knowing your audience.
Yes.
Who are they? Who are you speaking to? Who are you trying to serve? And what are their pain points? Why should they care about what you have to say?
So that's point number 4, and I say it this way: it's not about me. And I was so confused about that for so many years because, we see authors, breakout authors, who, like the woman who wrote the Harry Potter series, or those people who are unlike most of us who will be mid-list authors. And so I would see these other people, on TV talking about themselves, and so I thought that's what I was supposed to do. Even this morning, Brian, when I created a shout out to put on my social media for our talk today, I wrote it from my perspective. The first draft said, oh, I'm so excited to be talking live today with Brian, Allain, blah, blah, blah. And then I looked at that and I thought, wrong. Get some great writing tips or get some great book marketing tips at, 11 a.m. Eastern today when I talk to Brian. And so I always have to keep shifting myself back to remind myself it's not about me.
That is a great illustration. That's really such a good example.
Yeah. It's about who has the Lord, who's in need of what the Lord has given me to share. Who are they? Where are they? Where do they hang out on the internet? What are their pain points? And how can I speak to that? And authors who are in tune with that. Some people I've discovered are really, it seems they're almost naturally in tune to that. But the rest of us need to remind ourselves every day. I need a paper on my up on my computer monitor. It's not about me. And
I am the same way. I need to keep telling myself that continuously because I grew up as an engineer building products, right? And so you'd go and you'd spend all this time and money and build your product, and then you'd try to convince everybody how great it was.
Right.
Look at my thing. Look at my widget. Isn't it awesome? And I just like learned the hard way many times. You have to start with the customer.
Right.
And what do they need? What do they care about? And then work backwards from that.
Yes.
So it applies to just about everything I've ever done. You need to think that way.
Well, and I think about publishing in color. You've done that so beautifully by looking at the need of underrepresented writers and then creating what they needed. And it's just been so exciting to see that take off. And
just establishing the relationships alone, I think is huge, right? Allowing people to meet each other and get to know each other, understand each other. That, clearly was one of the things I was trying to achieve. And the second thing was, kind of what we were talking about earlier, how, people within the industry tend to assume that everyone knows how it all works. And people who are new to it don't. So, just lots of information sharing and what you would consider to be blocking and tackling. How to write book proposals, how to build your platform, how to position yourself, just the kind of things you've been talking about. We've been trying to have some of our sessions address those topics, that are hopefully learning and insightful and helpful.
And then the interesting thing that happens, is that relationship building. One day, Brian, I sat down and wrote and looked at all the work that I have been blessed to get over the years, all the writing work and freelance work. Almost all of it was referral. Friends do business with friends. And that's true in the Christian publishing world, too. I think about the time we first met. I believe that Lynn Kreiderman, who I had met, Brian, I had met Lynn 20-plus years ago when he was at Zondervan. And then when you got ready to do the Beekner conference at Princeton, I don't know how, but the Lord put my name on his heart, and he referred me to you. And so these are the relationships that we meet on this journey. The Lord is relational. That's how he does his work.
It's absolutely true. It's so important.
So so in budgeting and investing to go to other conferences or to network with other writers, not just yours, but others. It's just it's such a great investment, and we need each other because we do a lot of this work by ourselves. Here I am in my office. This is where I live, and so I'm always grateful that I can get out of that and connect with other people, and who also then enhance our careers as writers and authors. So number 5, before our time runs out, is to make a plan for this business of being an author. Michael Jordan used to say, make your plan and work your plan. And I didn't know at the beginning that my writing was a ministry and that my writing ministry was a business. That idea wasn't anywhere on the radar. And what I know now that I didn't know then, a couple of things. One, I know that very few authors make a living just on their writing, and that the need to have different revenue streams, which was a phrase I didn't know for a long time either, invites us to look at all the ways that we as authors can serve our audience. So yes, through writing books, or in my case, articles and devotionals, but also speaking at conferences and teaching. For a while I was doing coaching. I think you do still have your writer services.
Yes, absolutely.
And so as authors sit down and say, okay, the Lord has given me something, a message, something to say, part of getting that out is to develop a plan. Susie Flory always says, not having a plan is not a plan. And so, not having a plan is just not acceptable. We honor God. Here's an idea, Brian. We honor God when we intentionally give attention to all these parts of the work of writing ministry and developing our writing ministry as a business for Him. I think there's some idea out there that says, oh, if it's a business, it's tainted, or it's not spiritual, or it's not holy. But Jesus said, I will make you fishers of men, and I will make you fishers of people. It's a business. This is a business we're in. And it's okay.
So one offshoot of that I constantly, suggest to people is that marketing is not a dirty word. Along the same lines of what you're saying, it's like, well, you can call it marketing and you can think of it as a dirty word, but in reality, how do people know how that you can help them unless you make them aware of how you can help them?
Yes.
And
Seth Godin, do you read his book?
Yes, absolutely.
He says the exact same thing, that marketing is all the ways you can help people.
And if God's, inspired you to do this in the first place, then, let Him work through you and let Him help build awareness of how He and you can help people.
Yeah.
So anyway, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying.
And I think I told you that the day that we planned this webinar, I was on the treadmill listening to Charles Stanley. And on that particular day, he was talking about partnering in ministry and how we, as servants of God, can get a lot more done when we work together. And so on the way up the stairs, I said, Lord, would you show me who I can partner with this year? Two more steps into this room, saw I had an email, and it was from you saying, would you do a webinar with me? And and so I'm grateful for God. I'm grateful for His willingness to work with us and help us learn and help shape us into these author servants He wants us to be, if we'll take time to do the work and check with Him and rest with Him and learn from Him and from each other, and then rest in the vine. We're the branches. On my Twitter account, it says just a branch. He's the vine. And then this sap that runs through us yields the fruit. And it can be then, it can be a blessing to us, but certainly to the people that he's given us to serve. So I'm grateful for the opportunity today to talk with you today and with whoever is listening and watching about these things that we can learn to do and do better for him, because then we honor him. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. You and I have collaborated on multiple fronts already, and there are plenty of opportunities for us to do more together.
That is wonderful too. So those are my 5 points. I think this is when you, in a speaking setting, Brian, this is when you recap them. Number 1, keep your day job. Number 2, take it to God. Number 3, find yourself. Number 4, ironically, it's not about you. Find yourself, but it's not about me. And number 5, make your plan and work that plan and see what God will do.
Excellent. What a great set of pieces of advice.